Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? I don't know what day it is that you're going to hear this. I have no plan now that I'm thinking about it. All right, well, we did these mini shows that we put together, and I finally realized I ought to be doing an intro for the show over the intro music. I have a couple of, well, you probably heard them already. I don't know what I'm telling you for, but I recorded a couple of stories, and then I thought, oh, well, I'll just append the music on the front end and the back end, and I realized I spend so much time talking over the front and back end that I don't know exactly how I'm going to make those things work. But I guess by now you will have found out. It's just that I don't know yet, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. Time travel here on the Kagro in the Morning Show. So anyway, I have a very unusual set of stories. Some of the things, I guess the thing that set this in motion wasn't even a story, but that's what makes it so much fun. And I think, I don't know, there's probably about 3 articles that this one tweet led to, and I thought that might be an interesting inquiry. Let me set it up here. I'm sitting there minding my own business on Twitter, which I guess you can't really do. And it is, at this point, June 11th. I've been waiting to tell you this story. I don't know, since June 11th, when Aaron Rupar is tweeting around a screenshot of whatever's on Fox News that day. You know, the outrage of the day from Fox News, which is always entertaining. And it is a screenshot, and they have the whole thing. There's the chyron there, but there's also the background picture that they have. And the background picture says, "Bye-bye apple pie," like as a question. "Bye-bye apple pie." Are we saying goodbye to apple pie? I guess that's what they're trying to imply here. And the chyron adds to that by saying, Guardian writer, there's an article in the Guardian, apple pie has, quote, racist roots. All right. So, they're picking up on something that they want to get out. This is cancel culture before it transformed fully into just scream about CRT. Right? But this is the tail end of cancel culture stuff. And I guess it follows up on the whole Biden is going to outlaw hamburgers kind of thing. And I guess maybe the thinking was, well, if apple pie has allegedly racist roots, well, then we're going to cancel it as racist. And because apple pie is so American, as in the saying, as American as apple pie, which... do those of you who are non-Americans say that? I mean, you might say things like, as American as leaving a loaded gun in the couch for your toddler to find, or as American as type 2 diabetes. I don't know, whatever you might say about those things. But I don't know. Like Canadians, you've probably heard it, right? And I don't know, do English people say it? It's interesting because I read the article that's coming up here, and I don't think that English people necessarily need to agree that apple pie is all that American. But doesn't matter. The point is, it's a thing that gets said in places where I hear it, and it's my show. So here we go. So bye-bye apple pie. And Aaron Rupar laughs at it, takes a screenshot, is having a good time tweeting it around, and it says, "First they came for apple pie, and I did not speak out because I was more of a lemon meringue guy," which is funny and rhymes. So I guess that's good. And, well, I was ready to let it go at that. It was June 11th. I didn't care. I don't know what was going on June 11th. Nothing. I don't know. So I was letting it go, but up pops a response to this. And now I'm like, okay, I got to find out what this is about. From the Twitter account Warren, like Warren being his first name, but it's a joke, you see. His last name in all this is Terra, like Warren, War on Terror. Warren Terra. And if you're looking to find him on Twitter, I think it's actually Warren, and it looks like it might be 2 underscores and then Terra. But you'll see. Anyway, and Warren, whose name might not be Warren at all, tweets the Guardian article in question, and in response to the lunacy on Fox News, has this to say. He says, "It's not as ludicrous as the slogan it's boiled down to there, though I would say that it's a kind of dumb, contrived way to present a bunch of history that is, in any case, totally worth talking about." Well, okay, if it's totally worth talking about, let's do that. And he did, but on June 11th. So we're catching up. So the article, like I said, is from The Guardian, and the blurb that you can see for the article on Twitter says, food injustice. We know about food injustice. We don't talk about it a great deal. It's not our, wheelhouse, really. But food injustice has deep roots. Let's start with America's apple pie. Okay. And let's see, the blurb goes, from amnesia about apple pie to burger battlefields, author and academic Raj Patel says today's food injustice, or rather food justice fights have long bloody history. I don't know. So I got intrigued by that. And it's long bloody histories. That's true. That is, in fact, the subheader on the piece. Food injustice has deep roots. Let's start with America's apple pie. Raj Patel does just that, as I discovered on June 11th. But forget about all that. He wrote this on May 1st, 2021. Holy mackerel. All right, so this goes back a ways. And clearly he's been writing on this for a long time. And I don't know, it's only semi-political, but it just became fascinating. And then that led me to something else, because he makes mention of something. You know how I read these articles, and it'll say, well, blah, 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 and then this happened, and it's just like when that happened. When did that happen? Oh, my God, and I read the linked article. So it led me to another article, which led me to another article, and here we go. So here, what's the deal with apple pie? This actually turned out to be kind of fascinating. First, of course, setting up the whole thing. Just like on Fox News, they have a picture of, bye-bye apple pie. And it's the pies are projected up against the background. They drop the background in of what is that? Gingham tablecloth, right? Well, that gets mentioned actually right up at the top of this Guardian piece. Resting on gingham cloth, and we come back to that, a sugar-crusted apple pie cools on the windowsill of a Midwestern farmhouse and gets COVID from all the bikers driving to Sturgis, which might be going on by the time you hear this show. Anyway, nothing could be more American, except, like I mentioned before, guns, diabetes. Officially American, as a matter of fact. It says, the Department of Defense once featured the pie, apple pie, in an online collection of American symbols alongside Uncle Sam and cowboys. There's a link for this. This isn't the one I followed, but it does. There's a page here that does say Symbols of America, and there's patriotic songs and the Great Seal and the Bald Eagle. Apple pie is on the list, and I don't know, if anything happens if they're wrong about that, but okay. Not that apples, he goes on to say, are particularly American. Okay, so I see where we're going here. Apples were first domesticated in Central Asia, it turns out. There's a link that tends to prove it. Making the journey along the Silk Road to the Mediterranean 4,000 years ago. Okay. Apples traveled to the Western Hemisphere with Spanish colonists in the 1500s in what used to be called the Columbian Exchange, but is now better understood as a vast and ongoing genocide of indigenous people. So you can see where this is going to rub the Fox people the wrong way for sure. But is he wrong? No. Not that the recipe for apple pie, the recipe now, is uniquely American. And here what I was hinting at. It's a variant, like a Delta variant. It's a variant on an English pumpkin recipe. So, the recipe is kind of stolen. So pumpkin pie, at least the old English version of it, I guess, is what they used to develop the apple pie recipe at some point. By the time the English colonized the New World, apple trees, and this is fascinating too, had become markers of civilization, which is to say, property. In Virginia, apple trees were used to demonstrate to the state that land had been improved, so that you could mark it out as personal property, some property over which you had dominion. John Chapman, better known as Johnny Appleseed, I think we all know, Americans all know that legend. John Chapman, better known as Johnny Appleseed, took these markers of colonized property to the frontiers of U.S. expansion, where his trees stood as symbols that indigenous communities had been extirpated. I don't think we learned the sort of sinister side of this, right? But if apple trees were used to demonstrate that land had been improved, that probably also meant that the native tribes had been driven away and that this land was open for colonial settlement, white European settlement. And, we kind of learned, it's funny about, how you're not going to teach the kids, now that all the Indians are dead, I can finally plant an apple tree here. That's very grim. But they did, they taught, I guess, in the stupid grade school version of the legend that he was, I don't know, we learned something like he was just this kindly guy who just walked around planting apples because he wanted to help people, or that he was sort of marking the way west, like he was planting apple trees so that apples would grow and there would be plenty to eat for westward expansion, families on the trail west. But even that, it seems a little dumb. Like, what are they going to eat apples the whole way? I mean, it's great and all, and it's healthy and it's good to have fresh fruit, but I don't know. The idea is probably more likely that it was like, well, this area has been explored by white people and kind of sort of planted, and you're headed in the right direction, and it's pretty safe around here, I guess was supposed to be the idea. That's really fascinating. I don't know how accurate, but that's what I'm deriving from it. There's a couple of links here. The English pumpkin pie recipe is linked if you're looking for that. And then the idea that Virginia had used the apple trees to show that land had been improved. And then Johnny Appleseed has a link here. And where does it go to? Is it a book? Johnny Appleseed and the American Orchard, A Cultural History by William Kerrigan. A fresh look at the American icon Johnny Appleseed Chapman and the story of the apples. This sounds pretty upbeat. Back to The Guardian, though. So there we have it about the apples part. What about the sugar, right? Not that the sugar on the crust was uniquely American. Sugar cane, of course, was first brought to the U.S. by, this part I didn't know, by Jesuits in 1751. But most U.S. sugar remained an import until the Haitian Revolution, when enslaved workers seized the French colony in 1791. European capitalists sought new sugarcane fields and workers. French merchants of sugar and slavery landed in Louisiana in the late 1700s. Within 50 years, the U.S. produced a quarter of the world's sugarcane, and New Orleans had become a concomitant hub of the slave trade. So, yikes. I mean, that's the history of sugarcane, really. The American Civil War pushed the frontier of sugar westward. Hawaii's sugar plantations grew during U.S. Reconstruction. When the Philippines was a U.S. colony between 1898 and 1946, Filipino workers were exempted from the Asiatic Barred Zone to work in the U.S. sugar plantations in Hawaii, replacing more militant Japanese laborers, right? Interesting. So we needed cheap labor, I guess, to raise the sugarcane in Hawaii, and Japanese laborers were too concerned with actually having, I guess, livable conditions and decent wages, etc. And so, boom, now we have an immigration law barring Asian immigration, unless you are Filipino, because they are apparently easier to exploit, or at least were. Man, that's grim too. So the apples, the recipe, the sugar, now the gingham, right? Not that the gingham on which our apple pie rests is uniquely American. Columbus recorded cotton being used and worn during his first voyage by his indigenous hosts. The gingham pattern likely originated in Southeast Asia, the word deriving from the Malay, I'm going to just say, like it's spelled as though it's gengang, like G-E-N-G-G-A-N-G as one word, gengang. It is a striped cloth that arrived in Europe as Europe colonized Asia. Cotton from India became central to the British East India Company, representing 3/4 of the corporation's exports by 1766. As Sven Beckert's Empire of Cotton tells, this war capitalism enslaved and committed acts of genocide against millions of indigenous people in North America and millions of Africans and their descendants through the transatlantic slave trade. In the process, cotton laid the basis of finance, police, and government that made the United States. Wow, okay. Since this is quite a lot to acknowledge, it is easier to misremember, and really, even if it wasn't a whole lot, it's probably easier just to misremember. In the drama of nationalist culture, the bloody and international origins of the apple pie, that's rough, are subject to a collective amnesia. In the imagining of American community, the dish is transformed into a symbol of domesticity. By 1910, it's possible for a theater review to celebrate a wholesome play, quote, as American as apple pie. I guess that's supposed to be the origin of the saying. So, interesting. And yet, all of the things you visualize when you think about apple pie come from elsewhere. But that's going to be the case. And, all right, it's an interesting launching pad for a study like that. And thinking about food justice. And there's nothing, inherently racist in the pie, as they're saying. But, that's how Fox is going to treat the thing. But there's more to the article. Next section here is entitled Commodity Fetish. Guardian readers ought to know, or ought by now, to be familiar with the exercise of undoing the commodity fetish, which I don't think I'm familiar with, but they helpfully provide a link to commodity fetishism in Wikipedia. It says here, in Karl Marx's critique of political economy, commodity fetishism is the perception of certain relationships, especially production and exchange, not as relationships among people, but as social relationships among things, the money and commodities exchanged in market trade. As a form of reification, commodity fetishism perceives economic value as something that arises from and resides within the commodity goods themselves, and not from the series of interpersonal relations that produce the commodity and evolve its value. To give you some idea of what the subject is about, I don't think I ever actually sat down with the Communist Manifesto, although it was probably required reading at some point, but one of the things that I probably didn't really do along the way. But I don't know who would have assigned that. Early days, they probably wouldn't have allowed that at some point. Anyway, so now I know. I'm caught up on that. So Guardian readers, of course, will be familiar with it because they were assigned. They're English, and they got a really good education, and it included Karl Marx. And here in America, it was forbidden fruit, for not apples, but some other fruit, for a very long time. So Guardian readers ought by now to be familiar with this concept. Scratch the surface of a bar of chocolate, a tuna sandwich. Can you scratch the surface of a tuna sandwich? It's the bread. Or even a chicken nugget, and you find the horrors of international trade. Violence, exploitation, poverty, and profit. And it is kind of interesting, too. Like, I guess in commodity fetish world, among Republicans, what do you mean? How could you find violence and exploitation and poverty and profit. It's a chicken nugget. It's a piece of chocolate. It's happy. Everyone loves these things. Capitalist logic is everywhere the same, but countries are capitalist in their own ways. The apple pie is as American as stolen land, wealth, and labor. We live its consequences today. I mean, it's heavy-handed, but it's, there's a point there. The legacy of the United States founding racial territorial conquest and domination can be read off the Department of Labor's occupational data. In 2020, the whitest and most racially segregated job in this settler state was the appraising of property. Where 96.5% of property appraisers, are white. And the second whitest was managing a farm, where 96.3% of farmers. It is hardly a coincidence that the largest farmland owner in the United States is one of the country's richest men, Bill Gates. What? Bill Gates is one of the largest farmland owners in the United States. And I said, I've heard something about that before. I heard something vaguely familiar. Maybe we even read something about where, like, hedge funds, big-time hedge funds, were buying up farmland. Although we also read about them buying up trailer parks as well. But farmland was in there. And there was some bizarro rationale behind it. So it rang a bell, and it got me curious. And that's the link I followed. We'll circle back to that and find out what's up with this thing with Bill Gates being the largest farmland owner in the United States. I mean, I don't know. That is some segue. But for now, we continue. In the United States, the legacy contradictions within the food system are particularly acute. 7 out of the 10 worst paying jobs in America are in the food system, and women are overrepresented in them. Nearly a third of families headed by single mothers are likely to be food insecure, and food insecurity is systematically higher in communities of people of color, which I remind you in The Guardian is COLOUR. There has been a boom in the service industry over the past decade, yet when that work is occasional or characterized by shift work, as so much food service work is, you're more likely to be hungry. In part, that's because many precarious jobs are low wage and depend on tipping. Tipping was a European feudal relic imported to the United States by the well-traveled Victorian-era American upper class. Initially, it was widely reviled. Even as late as 1905, it was possible to find restaurants in St. Louis with signs in the window announcing, "No tipping. Tipping is not American." That is kind of bizarre how we turned that around. And why this was tipping stuck in the United States because it helped keep employers' wage bill low, right? Okay, and fit with racist sentiments like those of journalist John Speed, who wrote, "Tips go with servility, and no man who is a voter in this country is in the least justified in being in service." The Pullman Car Company hired black men from the South to work because he, the black man of the South, is more adapted to wait on people and serve with a smile. I'm just reading it. The minimum wage for tipped employees hasn't increased since 1991. It's still $2.13 an hour. I think we've heard all about that in all the attention we've been paying to the minimum wage in the last couple of years. In part, that's because the restaurant industry has always fought back. Herman Cain, the man who was co-chair of Black Voices for Trump until he attended a Trump rally and of all places, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and died of complications related to COVID-19, had a hand in undoing the legislation that tied the tip wage to the minimum wage. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Kane was chair of the National Restaurant Association, a group that activist Saru Jayaraman calls the other NRA, right? National Restaurant Association. The power of U.S. trade associations extends not just to the domestic economy, but internationally. You can't spell food industry. Yes, I guess that's true. You can't spell food industry without USTR. True. The United States Trade Representative, USTR, whose job it is to secure U.S. business interests overseas. Through treaties at the World Trade Organization and through NAFTA, the U.S. has done everything from generate an epidemic of diet-related disease in Mexico to decimate peasant food production in the global south. But the U.S. is happy to blame the migrants fleeing the economic consequences of U.S. agribusiness, and yet the U.S. continues to have a farm sector dependent on migrant labor. Well, all right. I'm getting tired of reading The Guardian. Boy, all right. Yeah, well, we're in bad shape here. Next section, struggle. The history of the U.S. food system has always, however, been one of struggle. Food justice is a term that is intelligible only because oppressed and exploited communities have organized for redress against the predations of U.S. capitalism. The U.S. was made by finding ever lower labor costs, and workers always fought back. Food justice and its opposite are of a piece. Consider the burger. All right, going to ban those too, right? America's red meat republic has long been the arena for struggles for justice. This is true even within the most iconic job in beef production, the one featured alongside apple pie at the U.S. Department of Defense's greatest hits of American iconography, cowboys. Although the myth of cowboys insists that they ranged alone, seldom hearing discouraging words, of course, the truth was that they were exploited as a class, and they knew it. Wages were low, and workers were frustrated by wage theft and underpayment. In 1883, they organized an illegal strike. Did you know that? One that spread from Texas to Wyoming. A cowboys strike. How do you like that? So from Texas to Wyoming, they went on strike, timing their actions to the spring harvest. That is when investors were about to receive their profits, right? Cowboys united to demand higher wages, better coffee, and the demand that cooks on the trail be paid as well as anyone else. For a while, they won, at least until 1888, when a combination of industry restructuring, anti-worker organizing by bosses, and brutal weather broke the back of worker militancy. Further down the beef production chain, unions in Chicago's squalid meatpacking industry were recruiting. In Upton Sinclair's classic 1907 novel, The Jungle, workers aren't passive amid the filth and horrors heaped upon them. They strike back. For a while, it even looked like they might win a sweeping change. The final sentences are a hymn to the inevitability of socialism in Chicago. Where the burger hit the table, hotel and portering unions were also in the fight. Tipping was resisted not just by those in the U.S. who considered it an insidious European import. Workers read it correctly as an opportunity for bosses to lower wages. In 1911, the International Hotel Workers Union demanded higher wages and no necessity of depending on tips. When the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters was organized in 1925 in defiance of the Pullman Company, One of its first orders of business of this first black trade union was to petition for a ban on tipping. Unions grew under the New Deal and won several victories for the hungry and for farmers in the northern U.S. The Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938, which introduced the minimum wage and overtime, was won at the zenith of the New Deal's strike wave. Food stamps, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and other New Deal legislation were, however, deeply flawed. Women's access to the New Deal's benefits were not federally recognized in the same way that men's were. Professions in which black people were overrepresented received fewer labor protections. Landowners, not sharecroppers in the South, received the benefits of federal largesse. Immigrants were deported in the 1930s to put America first. In Texas, where Jim Crow laws discriminated against Mexican and black people, injustices around race, gender, and citizenship came together in the 1938 San Antonio Pecan workers' strike. I'm going to be northern and say pecan versus the pecan workers' strike. The pecan industry needed cheap and nimble fingers to shell its products, and that meant women were recruited for its underpaid piecework, earning between 5 and 10 cents per pound of shelled nuts. When the Southern Pecan Shelling Company lowered the wage by a cent per pound, workers went on strike. Emma Tenayuca was the indigenous Mexican-American labor leader who helped organize a series of strike actions. As a member of the Communist Party, she'd cut her teeth organizing against the Border Patrol's beating of immigrants. The strike was the third attempt by workers to bring bosses to the table. The city's political machine targeted the strikers' soup kitchens and imprisoned strike leaders. The workers held out, broadening their demands for pay into wider demands for dignity. After over a month, the corporation agreed to arbitration and a higher wage. Tenayuca put it like this: what started out as a movement for equal wages turned into a mass movement against starvation, for civil rights, and for a minimum wage law. Next section, the fight. Battles over food justice continue in the United States. A recent Guardian/Northwestern University investigation pointed to the persistent racial divide in the food system. In Texas, black families reported hunger 4 times more often than white families, and in the week before Christmas 2020, 81 million people were food insecure. Domestic food justice movements are finding new ways to link their struggles through the intersections of race and gender, just as the old struggles did. Activists such as William Barber, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, point to the legacies of slavery that live in the U.S. practice of tipping and are mounting campaigns against its iniquities, building a multiracial coalition in the tradition of Martin Luther King Jr. and Jesse Jackson. The red, black, green New Deal portends a similar front for organizing. It is clear, though, that tensions and imperfections and losses lie ahead. The U.S. continues to spread its economic model internationally. While Joe Biden's administration seems ready to infuse cash into the management of domestic hunger, internationally, it's agribusiness as usual. But as May Day reminds us, remember that was the publication date, as May Day reminds us, solidarity between workers need not be bounded by the nation state. The United States was made through global connections. It will be remade when those links are not ones of oppression, but ones of solidarity in the fight for food justice. Wow. Well, I wasn't ready for that in the apple pie entree to this. Not entree, it's a dessert, you see. But I mean in the entranceway sense. Raj Patel, it notes at the end, by the way, is the author of Stuffed and Starved: Markets, Power, and the Hidden Battle for the World's Food System. Yikes. Currently working on a documentary and book about the future of the food system, if you are interested in checking that out. So, that was a bit of a curveball in the reading, and I just really thought I'd love to share that at some point, but when the hell am I going to fit that in with all the other things going on? And the answer is right now, whenever it is. I don't know what day this one airs, but we'll see. In the meantime, what about that Bill Gates thing? What the hell's that about? Well, the link took us to landreport.com. Land Report is the magazine of the American landowner. That doesn't sound like my kind of magazine. I mean, I don't know, a little teeny square of townhouse land, I guess, but I don't think that's what they mean. And the logo next to the Land Report's own, logo type up at the top is that of the Realtors Land Institute. So I'm not really sure what this publication is all about, but let's take a look at this. Bill Gates, America's top farmland owner. I don't think it's terribly overlong, but I have that and another article which popped up a couple weeks later that might help give it, might help bring us back, segue back to the politics end of this. But Eric O'Keefe, maybe James O'Keefe's friend, I don't know. But anyway, there's lots of O'Keefes running around. Eric O'Keefe is the author of this piece for the Land Report. I don't know whether that's a freelance gig or what. The co-founder of Microsoft, that's Bill Gates, right? Okay, and his wife, are they getting divorced? I can't remember all the billionaires that get divorced. Anyway, and his wife rank as America's largest private farmland owners. I'm confused by my billionaires. I think maybe I don't know. Doesn't matter. Farmland is the issue here. Call it a hunch, but the story did not jibe. I scanned the headline for the umpteenth time and then read and reread the pertinent details. Very small type on this page. I'm going to have to zoom in a bit. Something was missing. Either that or I had a screw loose or the type was too small. According to reporting by Wendy Culverwell in the Tri-City Herald, a 14,500-acre swath of choice eastern Washington farmland in the Horse Heaven Hills of Benton County, had just traded hands for almost $171 million. That's a ginormous deal. One that pencils out, to almost $12,000 per acre for a whole lot of acres. Pretty pricey dirt, right? That's exactly what I thought. Boy, you're really cool, Eric. I don't know. I'm enjoying this. Especially when it comes to row crops like sweet corn and wheat, which were grown in rotation with potatoes on 100 Circles, which is the name of the property that changed hands. Then again, farmers and investors in the Mid-Columbia River market expect to pay $10,000 to $15,000 for good ground. Anyone who has ever studied the Columbia River Basin knows that the tillable acreage there is coveted ground, a geologic wonder. The soil profile and underlying silty loess, I don't know how you pronounce that. This is a farm tech term. LOESS. Those of you who live there are like, duh, it's pronounced, what is it? All right. But the soil profile and underlying silty stuff there are in a league of their own, which is, I guess, why the lead characters of A League of Their Own. We're living in, all right, you get the idea. Okay, great farmland, right? Wonderful. I had gained this smidgen of geologic proficiency while researching our 2018 Farmland Deal of the Year. Boy, that is an exciting job you got there, Eric. All right, well, I would look for any excitement I could, too, if that's my job. Researching the 2018 Farmland Deal of the Year. Well, they got it. It was Weidert Farm, maybe Weidert, Weidert Farm in neighboring Walla Walla County. So all the top dollar farm transactions are happening up there. One of the most telling moments in the field that summer came when a soil scientist by the name of Alan Busaka grabbed a shovel and stepped into a 10-foot trench that had been ripped open on the farm by a Caterpillar 336, which I guess if you know how to pronounce the underlying silty lows or whatever it is, you probably know what a Caterpillar 336 is exactly. I know Caterpillar, but okay. Dusky layers of silt and sand towered over the 6-foot-tall retired Washington State professor. I guess that would be Alan Busacca. There wasn't a rock, let alone a pebble, or even a root to be seen in the soil. Busacca was in his element. It was some of the richest farmland in the lower 48, and from an agricultural perspective, the region surrounding Walla Walla and the Horse Heaven Hills has evolved into a commercial hub, complete with controlled atmosphere storage, that's CA for short, controlled atmosphere storage, state-of-the-art transportation infrastructure, and ready access to low-cost hydropower. These are a few of the reasons why savvy investors have been plowing, millions of dollars into farmland on both the Oregon and Washington sides of the Columbia River Gorge. At current valuations, it is one of the nation's best farmland opportunities. In 2018, when 100 Circles sold, it was even better. More often than not, farmland sales involve hundreds of acres. 1,000-acre transactions, such as the sale of 6,000-acre Whitert Farm to Farmland LP 2 years ago, and the 6,175-acre, everything's got a name, Broche orchards, Broche, Broetje. Hey man, America first. What the hell's going on here? I don't even pronounce anything. Why didn't it look Parker Farms or something easy like that? All right. Well, anyway, that one, that acquisition was by the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan last year. But things that big, as he says, are blue moon events. Tens of thousands of acres? Only sovereign wealth funds and institutional investors can stroke a check for tracts in that league, which is exactly what occurred on the sell side of the 100 Circles transaction. The seller was John Hancock Life Insurance, a multi-billion-dollar asset manager with key holdings in all the major U.S. markets, as well as Canada and Australia. The story went dark on the buy side, however. The Tri-City Herald reported that the purchaser was a Louisiana investor, a limited liability company associated with Angelina Agriculture of Monterey, Louisiana. Sorry, but that didn't pass the sniff test. All right, he's on it. He's an expert. He can tell. What? Never heard of him. I would have to know who buys in this quantity, right? I mean, I guess that's true. The land report tracks numerous Louisiana landowners. Angelina Agriculture, whatever that is not one of them. Let's call that strike one. The burgeoning metropolis of Monterey, population 462, rang a bell, but despite my best efforts, I couldn't connect the dots to anyone whom we had profiled in the land report, or for that matter, anyone who was on our watch list. I mean, I guess if you're the land report and you're documenting farm transactions, a town of population 462, not that uncommon, so I guess you really would. Maybe it did ring a bell, but okay. Still didn't solve the mystery. But I have a feeling we've already solved the mystery because we've read the headline. Still, now I'm on the edge of my seat. So, I took a look at Dun and Bradstreet. As its listed headquarters, 8318 Highway 565, Angelina Agriculture boasted 2 employees and reported annual revenues just north of $300,000. Given the size and cost of 100 Circles, both of those figures made no sense at all. Strike 2. How about Google Maps? Okay. An aerial image of the Highway 565 address revealed a small metal-sided building off by itself in the woods. Strike 3, right? One of my favorite Clint Eastwood movies, why not? Let's throw that in there, is the 1999 mystery thriller True Crime. Familiar with it? I'm trying to think about it. I don't think so. In it, the 4-time Academy Award winner plays an over-the-hill journalist who has a nose for a story. I'm quite confident that Eastwood's character, Steve Everett, would have picked up on the stench from this setup a mile off. A $171 million acquisition by an LLC with 2 employees in a metal-sided building down a dirt road off the Bayou Teche. Teche? T-E-C-H-E. They're killing me with this stuff. By the way, the American Heartland is ridiculously un-American sounding. I just want to say that. I'm going to use that sometime. Anyway, I forwarded the lead to our Land Report 100 research team. Who even knew there was one? Minutes later, a terse response arrived. Ever hear of Bill Gates? Well, sure, but... So how does this happen? The paper trail. Okay. Let's see. Actually, when it comes to the extensive farmland portfolio of Bill and Melinda Gates, the question should be, ever hear of Michael Larson? No, is my answer. For the last 25 years, the Claremont McKenna College alum has managed the Gates' personal portfolio, as well as the considerable holdings of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Wow, that guy's got it made. Although our researchers identified dozens of different entities that own the Gates' assets, Larson himself operates primarily through an entity called Cascade Investments, LLC. In 1994, the Gateses hired the former Putnam Investments bond fund manager to diversify the couple's portfolio away from the Microsoft founders' 45% or co-founders' 45% stake in the technology giant while maintaining comparable or better returns. According to a 2014 profile of Larson in the Wall Street Journal, these investments include a substantial stake in AutoNation, hospitality interests such as the Charles Hotel in Cambridge. Oh, I was actually there once. And the Four Seasons in San Francisco. I had to go to a wedding. Well, now I know where my money went. And here I've been buying Apple all this time. My goodness. All right. Well, he got me eventually. And also now, on top of the Charles Hotel and the Four Seasons in San Francisco and AutoNation, at least 100,000 acres of farmland in California, Illinois, Iowa, Louisiana, and other states. According to the Land Report 100 research team, that figure is currently more than twice that amount, which means that Bill Gates, co-founder of Microsoft, has an alter ego, Farmer Bill, the guy who owns more farmland than anyone else in America. The Gates' largest single block of dirt was acquired in 2017, a group of farmland assets owned by the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. Based in Toronto, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board began assembling an agricultural portfolio in 2013 when it acquired AGCOA, aka the Agricultural Company of America, AGCOA. This private U.S. farmland REIT, R-E-I-T, REIT is, I know that's some sort of tax lingo if I'm not mistaken, but offhand, it doesn't speak to me. But I'm going to Google it just while I'm here. I think I've done it before too, and I've had to come up. Real Estate Investment Trust. Where have I run into that before? Well, we'll see what happens if it occurs to me later on. But Real Estate Investment Trust. Okay. Now, that was where we leave off of it. Yes, right. The AGCOA, Agricultural Company of America, is the private real estate investment trust that we were talking about. It's a joint venture between Duquesne Capital Management and Goldman Sachs that launched in 2007. Over the next 5 years, AGCOA acquired more than 100,000 acres in 9 states. By the time it was sold to the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board in 2013, AGCOA ranked as one of the leading institutional owners of row crop farmland in the U.S. I'm still not entirely clear on why this happens, but obviously they're making some money from it, but I'm just sort of curious about what the dynamics are. Will we ever learn from this? I don't know. After AGCOA, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board acquired a second tranche of farmland assets when it paid $2.5 billion for a 40% stake in Glencore Agricultural Products in 2016. The very next year, however, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board began shedding these very same farmland assets as quickly as it had acquired them. And it did this so quietly, one might even say it was done in secret. There was no public announcement and no notice of the business in the business press. Instead, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board revealed in the fine print of a quarterly statement that it had sold $520 million in U.S. farmland assets held by AGCOA. Credit Chris Janiak at Agri-Investor for this eagle-eyed investigating. The Americans editor at Agri-Investor, Janiak, Janiec, reported that the assets had been offered as a single block and that Microsoft founder Bill Gates is thought to be the buyer of the pension board's farmland. Janiak stayed on the story, and the following year he confirmed the parameters of sale when he reported the addition of 61 properties valued at approximately $500 million to the National Council of Real Estate Investment Fiduciaries U.S. Farmland Index. This $500 million figure corroborated the AGCOA acquisition, and the paper trail led directly to Cascade Investment LLC. I'm lost. All told, the 2017 acquisition of AGCOA and the 2018 acquisition of the 100 Circles tract in the Horse Heaven Hills of eastern Washington total an investment in farmland assets of more than $690 million. Janiak's sources said some of the AGCOA assets were quickly sold off, but according to the Land Report 100 research team, an estimated 242,000 acres of farmland remained. I assume it's all on fire at this point, right? Yet, farmland assets aren't the sole component of the Gates' landholding. And I guess it's probably really not, because it's all being irrigated the whole time. So, anyway, yes, farmland assets aren't the sole component of Gates' land holdings. In 2017, Cascade Investment bought a, quote, significant stake of 24,800 acres of transitional land on the western edge of Phoenix, the most populous city in America. Is that right? And the 10th largest metropolitan area in the country. Most populous city. Oh, I'm sorry. That can't possibly be the most populous city in America. I'm like, I know that's false. So I'll go back and read that again. It's the most populous city in Arizona. Did I say America? Because Arizona is pretty plainly what it says. And the 10th largest metropolitan region in the country. It's big, but it ain't that big. The acreage sits off Interstate 10, and it is poised to be accessible by Interstate 11, which I guess comes next. Makes sense, right? A proposed highway that would traverse 5 miles of the 40 square mile holding. This is like one of those, fantasy things from a movie somewhere where the rich guy buys some sort of desert patch that nobody wants because he knows he's got the inside scoop on the road being built. And it's really happening here. At build-out, the Belmont development will create a brand new metropolis, one similar in size to the Phoenix suburb of Tempe, home to Arizona State University, and almost 200,000 residents. According to the Arizona Republic, Belmont is projected to include up to 80,000 homes, 3,800 acres of industrial, office, and retail space, 3,400 acres of open space, and 470 acres for public schools. I guess if you're Bill Gates, you basically just start a city as a hobby. An investment, too. You're just going to own the whole thing. Cascade Investment doubled down on Phoenix transitional land 2 years later when it made a second major investment by acquiring more than 2,800 acres known as Spurlock Ranch in Buckeye for $25 million. Pocket change, right? Now, there's a little graphic in here of where the Gateses own land. Just to run quickly through it, 16,000 plus acres in Washington state, 9,200 or so acres in Idaho, Joan. Wyoming, 975 acres of Wyoming. It's a small bit of Wyoming. California, 4,500 acres. Arizona, 25,750 acres. That's the biggest chunk so far, but there's more to come. Ready? New Mexico, 1 acre. Okay. Did you buy a house in New Mexico? Is that all? Colorado, 2,270 acres. Nebraska, 20,588 acres. Iowa, lots of farmland in Iowa, but not much for sale, I guess. 552 acres, enough for a baseball field or two. Wisconsin, 1,188 acres. I'm not done yet. Illinois, 17,940 acres. Michigan, 2,167 acres. Indiana, 9,136 acres. Ohio, 8,915 acres. North Carolina, 874 acres. Florida, 14,828 acres, all covered in COVID. Mississippi, I'm getting near the end here, 16,963 acres. Arkansas, talk about your COVID hotspots. Now he's really getting into it. 47,927 acres. But now the biggest one, and maybe the biggest COVID hotspot, Louisiana, 69,071 acres, which now actually makes me thinking, okay, yes, he owns land in Louisiana, Arkansas, Nebraska, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Idaho, Washington. How much of that is the Louisiana Purchase? I'm just curious. Like he might own he certainly owns the biggest chunk of the Louisiana Purchase. He should have just bought it directly from Napoleon. Too bad. Well, when he builds the time machine, maybe that's what this is all about. He's going to finally develop a time machine, go back and get all that land for, well, I guess dirt cheap. By the way, farmland is 242,000 acres of that. There's the additional 25,750 transitional acres. That's all in Arizona. And 1,234 recreational acres. That's including 1 acre probably in New Mexico. Just purely dedicated to juggling. I'm kidding, but who knows at this point what that might be. Total, by the way, holdings, you wanted to know the number, 268,984 acres owned by that guy, Bill Gates. It's a lot. So let's get on with it here. It's getting long, this mini show. Sustainable investing, the next section here. A spokesman for Cascade Investment declined to comment on any of the details associated with these transactions or the Gates' holdings, other than to say that Cascade is very supportive of sustainable farming. That's nice. Much like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation uses science and technology to achieve a number of worthy goals, including transitioning millions of people out of poverty, improving people's health and well-being, and ensuring that all people have access to opportunities necessary to succeed in school and in life, Cascade's farmland holdings also aim to further laudable objectives. In January 2020, the Land Report announced the launch of a sustainability standard that was developed by U.S. farmland owners and operators. Called Leading Harvest, the organization's goal is to create a sustainability standard that can be implemented across the greatest swath of agricultural acreage, which if one guy owns it, I guess that's easy. Currently, more than 2 million acres in 22 states and an additional 2 million acres in 7 countries are represented. Among the participants in the 13-member Sustainable Agriculture Working Group are Ceres Partners, Hancock Natural Resources Group, we heard about them, the Royhaton Group, and UBS Farmland Investors. And I guess that probably means a lot more to people who read the land report than it does to me, but okay. Not surprisingly, one of Leading Harvest's other inaugural members is a Cascade entity called Cottonwood Ag Management. Committing the resources to launch this all-important standard validates the assertion that Cascade supports sustainable strategies that advance resiliency and efficiency, retain talent, and reduce regulatory burdens. I guess that made Republicans cheer. But did Cottonwood Ag Management mean a lot to you? I don't know. Although the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has no ties whatsoever to Cascade or its investments, it also has a farmland initiative, Gates Ag 1, which has established its headquarters in the greater St. Louis area. Second call out for St. Louis today. According to the St. Louis Business Journal, Gates Ag 1 will focus on research that helps smallholder farmers, that's one word, farmers, adapt to climate change and make food production in low and middle income countries more productive, resilient, and sustainable. Sounds good. Now there's a closing note, which I hope is short because I want to close. Remember that metal-sided building down near the bayou, right? Bayou Teche, whatever that is. Turns out that very same property had caught my eye way back when the land report was preparing to launch in 2006. Does the name Bernie Ebbers ring a bell? Nope. Once upon a time, the business press dubbed the colorful entrepreneur the telecom cowboy. That was before the Edmonton native was put on trial for his role in what was at the time the largest corporate bankruptcy filing in U.S. history. In 2005, the former WorldCom CEO, the former WorldCom CEO was convicted of securities fraud, conspiracy, and filing false reports that were instrumental in WorldCom's $11 billion accounting fraud. Bernie Ebbers. Now, that does ring a bell. After losing his appeal in 2006, Ebbers spent most of the rest of his life in a federal prison before being granted compassionate release by a federal judge earlier this year. He died on February 2nd, surrounded by his family. Ebbers was many things, a dreamer, a liar, a swindler, and he loved land, which I guess the land report guys do. In 1998, when he was the toast of Wall Street, the telecom cowboy paid British Columbia's Woodward family the astronomical sum of $73 million for Canada's largest ranch, 500,000-acre Douglas Lake, a 22,000-head cattle operation. Ebbers subsequently pledged Douglas Lake as collateral for $400 million he ended up borrowing from WorldCom. And in 2003, WorldCom sold Douglas Lake to Cronky Ranches, Kronke. The $68.5 million that Cronky Ranches, that sounds weird, paid was applied to Ebbers' IOU. He also owned a 26,236-acre Louisiana farm. It, too, was sold on September 25th, 2006, the day before Ebbers began serving his sentence at the Oakdale Federal Correctional Institution. It was his last deal as a free man. When Ebbers owned this Louisiana farm, it was known as Angelina Plantation. It's beginning to come together. And its headquarters was in, you guessed it, Monterey, Louisiana. That was the missing piece of the puzzle I'd been searching for as I read the Tri-City Herald story. In a former life, Angelina Agriculture, the purchaser that paid $171 million for 100 circles in 2018, was in fact Bernie Ebbers' Angelina Plantation. The day before he went to prison, Ebbers sold Angelina for $32 million. The farm was subsequently sold to AgCoa, which was acquired by the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. In 2017, Angelina Plantation changed hands one more time and became one of the principal farmland assets of the Gates' Cascade investment portfolio. It took a dozen years, but the ownership of that Louisiana farmland went from Bernie Ebbers to Bill Gates with a couple stops in between. I readily admit forgetting where and when I first caught wind of it, but the moment I read that Tri-City Herald story, I knew the ending definitely needed a rewrite. Steve Everett would be proud. That was pretty amazing. Wow. So, by the way, it does say this article was updated to properly credit Wendy Culverwell as the reporter who first broke the story of the Horse Heaven Hills transaction in the Tri-City Herald. Pretty amazing. But did you know that there's more? At least there was more in pocket. But man, we're getting on here. Let's see. Should I read through this story and add it to this? Sure, why not? Sometimes we have 2-hour shows. One last bit from Vox. So, you know it's good. With a name like Vox, I don't know. Rebecca Heilwell, Heilwell. I'm sure I butchered that. Rebecca, thanks very much for putting this together. We're back to June 11th again, somehow, which is amazing that this was published on the same day and I didn't know it, but the same day that I became aware of the Bill Gates thing. And then this shows up in Vox, but I didn't find it until a couple days later, so kind of weird. The controversy over Bill Gates becoming the largest private farmland owner in the U.S. There had to be something wrong with it, right? Leave it to Vox to figure it out. The land report guys just like the idea of a lot of land. Vox is going to go hunting. People are drawing connections, she says, between Gates's vast farmlands and climate change advocacy. But it sounded like a good thing in the other article. So what's up? Bill Gates might be a tech billionaire, but he and his wife, Melinda French Gates, who are in the process of divorcing, I knew it, are also two of the largest private farmland owners in the United States. So this is a real problem. It's like Green Acres. They're gonna split up because, I don't know, she likes the city, but he likes the farm, or maybe vice versa in this version. Who gets the farmland? Recent reports detailing the extent of Gates's land ownership have prompted criticism from some environmental advocates and farmers who say there seems to be a contradiction between his public environmental advocacy and his personal investment strategy. Others have speculated the farmland purchases may be part of the billionaire's overall climate efforts themselves. Bill Gates, I had to add that themselves to make sense out of this sentence. Bill Gates has said there's no connection either way. But the new details on the purchases and the discussion surrounding them serve as an important reminder that billionaires can store their massive wealth in all sorts of unexpected places, and that there can often be a tension between their personal investments and their more publicized philanthropic work. On Tuesday, NBC News reported that the Gateses had acquired more than 269,000 acres of farm in the United States in the past 10 years. Those purchases, made with the help of the Washington-based firm Cascade Investment and a number of shell companies, include farmland in nearly 20 states that cultivate vegetables such as carrots, soybeans, and potatoes, some of which end up in McDonald's French fries, it notes parenthetically. These details come after the agriculture outlet The Land Report reported in January, we're all reading the same thing now, that the tech billionaire and his wife were the country's top private farmland owners in the country. Why does it say country twice? I don't know. No editors at Vox. An NBC News analysis also identified Gates as the largest farmland owner in the U.S., Almost 300,000 acres is a lot of land for one family or private individual to own, but it's still just a small part of the estimated 911 million acres of farmland in the U.S. That helps put it in perspective. Well, while Gates appears to be one of the largest private farmland owners in the country, he's far from alone in wanting to incorporate farmland into his investment strategy. As Mother Jones recently reported, other large financial firms have sought to purchase agricultural land too, even if they have no involvement in the day-to-day farming operations. Land Report, the outlet that named Gates the top private farm owner, notes several other families that claim well over 100,000 acres. The U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that about 30% of U.S. farmland is rented out by owners who serve as landlords and aren't involved in farming, like Gates. All this is to say, it shouldn't be surprising that Bill Gates, one of the wealthiest people in the world, makes investments to serve his own financial interests. It's a good investment. Jonathan Hladek, a farmer and the policy director for the Center on Rural Affairs, says. It's smart, it's stable, and especially over the past couple decades, it seems to be going up. Still, Gates' land ownership has attracted particular attention because the billionaire has tried to make a name for himself in climate advocacy. Gates is currently promoting a book on the subject and has positioned himself and the Gates Foundation as a leader in what the future of agriculture should look like, especially in regard to technology. The one Georgia farmer and environmental advocate, John Quarterman, told NBC that while he expected that Gates would encourage more sustainable practices after buying farmland nearby, his acquisition of that land didn't change much. And the National Farmers Union has suggested that the growing number of non-farmer owners like Gates buying up farmland and renting it out could lead to practices that hurt the environment. Short-term farmers who rent land are less likely to take long-term conservation steps, the organization argues, and non-farmer owners don't have the experience to understand the importance of protecting natural resources. Others have floated the opposite idea, that Gates' massive investment in farmland might have a direct relationship to his other climate efforts. Newsweek, for instance, recently suggested that his land ownership may be connected to his investments in climate change, agricultural developments, and impossible foods, though it didn't offer much support for that premise. While Bill Gates has previously tried to separate his Gates Foundation work on the climate from his private investments, Cascade Investment has defended its record on sustainability. In response to criticism, a spokesperson for Cascade Investments emphasized that it had enrolled all its farmland in a program by Leading Harvest, a nonprofit that releases standards for sustainability focused on biodiversity, conservation, and soil. Cascade plans to continue to evaluate and implement new initiatives that will improve the overall sustainability of its farmland portfolio, the spokesperson told Recode. I guess that's the vertical under the Vox umbrella that's doing the reporting. More broadly, Gates and other wealthy buyers of farmland have also been criticized for contributing to the concentration of land ownership. Because they can usually make higher bids than what local farmers can afford, fewer people end up owning their own farmland. As University of New Mexico professor Nick Estes wrote for The Guardian in April, this results in a greater push for monocultures and more intensive industrial farming techniques to generate greater returns, while indigenous people and small farmers are more cautious with the use of land. So maybe the 1 acre in New Mexico, out of spite, Gates went and bought Nick Estes' house. Kicked him out. I don't know. Anyway, the issues at play go beyond what pieces of land Bill Gates has bought. People tend to look either for the salvation story, he's doing this to save the planet, or they look for the opposite. It's just another greedy landowner. Bruce Sherrick, a agriculture professor at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, told Recode. Sherrick, who is on the board of Leading Harvest, says that Gates-owned farms are taking a positive step by following Leading Harvest's standards. Gates himself made a point to differentiate his climate advocacy and his investments. In a Reddit AMA in March, the billionaire seemed to try to separate his climate advocacy and his personal investments when he asked about his wealth of land. My investment group chose to do this. It's not connected to climate. The agriculture sector is important, he said in the post, before adding a more general comment about deforestation and biofuels. But whatever Gates might wish, many observers can't quite separate the two things. For them, Bill Gates, the environmentalist, is also Bill Gates, the commercial farmland owner. And they think the two roles are connected even if Gates doesn't consider them to be. We've actually made it all the way to the end of the article, and the music indicates it's time for us to get the hell out of here. Of course, we don't have any update on what Justice is up to after us, but we'll wing it after this.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, I don't know what we could wing it with. Why don't we just say that Justice Putnam coming up next, of course, although who knows what comes in between this and his scheduled start of the show, but his whole hour will undoubtedly be dedicated to farmlands, apple pie, and Bill Gates. What could be more American than that? I'm kidding, of course. See you again soon.